The Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass. Where we make it happen, grab your seat, let's have a blast. At the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. I have Alex Holt with me today. Hello, Alex. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Rebecca. And do you mind if we start that one again? Because for work purposes, I'm an Alexander.
Oh, okay. Well, let's say.
But I thought for the informality of the course, the wonderful NLP course that we did, I thought Alex, fine. That was amongst friends.
Hello, Alexander Holt, and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. How are you today?
Very well, thanks, Rebecca. And it's always lovely to share a space with you, be that online or on the phone or in room, as we have recently.
Yeah, definitely. And you do know I'm not going to edit the first bit out, don't you?
I know that. Exactly.
All right. So the purpose of the podcast is to help entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders really feel that they're not alone and to learn from other people's experiences. And that's one of the reasons I don't edit it, actually, unless somebody makes a major faux pas, because we can't go back and edit out the stuff that we wish we hadn't done whilst we've been growing our careers or businesses or whatever. So unless it's completely heinous, it stays in. So it's staying in, Alex. Right. So Tell me about what you do right now. What's your job title?
So I work for the Scottish Government, which I have been doing for the past 9 years. Can't believe that. On my entrepreneurial journey, would never have thought that. And my current role is within the Economic Development Division, a directorate. Okay. So all around looking about the entrepreneurship within policy and how do we create more Scottish entrepreneurs, very simplistically.
Cool, which I like. I think to have a bit of the government that's involved in encouraging entrepreneurs is encouraging in and of itself. How on earth did you end up doing that?
Well, it was my journey has been a random one at the best of times, and I would say it's I've never had a career, but more of a portfolio of interesting experiences. And the past 4 years has really focused on looking at kind of international innovation. So rewind to 2015, and I was asked by my director to look at engagement of tech and academia by the government. And this led me to explore all the ways that sort of government does and doesn't interact well. And of course, the usual bugbears around procurement and working with government always came up. So, and particularly around from smaller businesses. So there started a journey about redefining how government worked with smaller businesses, particularly through the procurement methodologies. So we set up an innovation program, which I can tell more about in a second.
All right. What did you do before then?
So before then, I joined the Scottish Government in 2014 as a contractor.
Okay.
Having moved back up to Edinburgh from London, where I'd been for 8.5 years. So in London, I'd run my own digital agency for 6.5 years, delivering super shiny web apps for all sorts of brands and agencies. And then worked for my chairman for a couple of years after that, and then moved back up to Scotland, which is where home is.
Okay, so a lot of business owners will be delighted that a real entrepreneur is talking to the Scottish Government about entrepreneurship.
Yes, and I think this is one of the things, is that actually I've lived it. I've known the highs and lows. I know what it's like in terms of, developing a proposition, winning business, paying the bills, making sure it's not just your mortgage, but everyone else's mortgages you're looking after, and so I know the worries about payroll, winning business, growing brands. And so deploying that methodology and mindset within government has to a large part given me the success I have in terms of the innovation programs that I've set up and delivered.
Yeah. Now, there's one in particular, an innovation program that has gone global, hasn't it?
So we set up CivTech in 2016. In fact, in the autumn of 2015, we mapped out this whole idea about really how you redefined the procurement processes. So for those who are familiar with going to a large organization or public sector company, a public sector organization with as part of a procurement, they'll know the be careful what I say here, but the challenges around filling in all sorts of necessary documentation. And that's great if it's a big, expensive tender. But if it's smaller, then there's different type of proportionality that should be applied. And having spent the previous year working on tech procurements, it gave me an insight as to actually what was a better route to do things, or rather what were some of the problems we'd encounter, and if you had your small business hat on, how could you improve those? And I think a part of it was that, and we're going back 9 years, so a lot of it has changed, but when you're writing specifications which are immediately out of date because technology has moved so quickly, and because technology does move so quickly, how do you procure what you don't know exists?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you need to adopt a completely different approach, which was one of understanding and articulating the problem. So rather than saying, hey, we want something that does X, Y, and Z, actually the problem we're trying to solve is A, B, C. And so that completely changes how you approach the market, who you get to solve your problem, win the business, and therefore what government levers as a great blue chip reference client can do to help support and grow small businesses with innovative exportable technologies. And so this was kind of the premise. We had a number of hypotheses around this. And in late 2015, early 2016, we set up the CivTech program. So this was a model by which you set challenges, and that approach has been around since 1714 when the British government tried to solve the longitude prize. But then you adopted challenge-based processes with other private sector tools such as accelerator programs. So you can marry these two approaches, and that approach was essentially, the first GovTech program in Europe, arguably the first digital public services accelerator in the world. And that methodology was then replicated by other governments or tweaked or so. But it certainly became the inspiration for a number of programs around the world in terms of kind of South America, all across Europe and Australia. So it's really interesting what happens when you apply an entrepreneurial mindset, persistence, resilience, urgency, and deploy that within a public sector, which is often not operating at that same sort of speed and mentality. And that's not a bad thing. They're just different. But when you're working to the needs of smaller businesses, which need to, be paid quickly, operate quickly, it's a different type of way of working. And so having empathy for small business is one of the key reasons we were able to deliver the program we did.
I love the fact that it's gone around the world. How did you promote it? Or did people come and find you?
It was more that people came and found us in the first instance. So we launched in 2016, had a number of challenges, and a really good team as part of it, all of whom had either built, sold, or crashed their company. So, we had a very multidisciplinary team of consultants, contractors, some public servants, and developing this rapidly. It took 146 meetings over 6 months to get it off the ground between January to June 2016. But we got the results quite quickly, and that meant, all right, we're onto something here. And so within the just after the first cycle, we started having inquiries from other governments around how to do this. And particularly, I think back to 2017 when we had Gavin Jennings, the Special Minister for State in Victoria State in Australia, concluding his 2-week tour of Europe with 2 days in Scotland, and saying, actually, everything we've seen, we're doing already, except this.
Oh, wow.
Can you come out and speak to our teams? So in the September 2017, I went out to Melbourne and Victoria State and had a chat with their finance and procurement teams. And exactly a year later, they set up CivTech Labs. So, you can see this stuff start off in Norway, GovTech Lab, Lithuania, GovTech Polska, lots of places.
And has this methodology been applied to procurement outside of technology?
Yes, so it's interesting. So it started in digital technology, but it's gone wider. And I ran the program for the first 4 years, so up until 2019, and then focused on the international network. But what we found was that the whole notion of articulating a problem, going out to really talented innovators and saying, how would you use your technology to solve this? Well, we had a classic case for the 4th round of CivTech, which was looking at tree seed supply. So you think something about it as undigital as you can get. And we were working with the kind of the forestry, was then the former Forestry Commission, now Forestry and Land Scotland, and they were presenting us with this non-digital problem. We thought, hang on, we can apply the same methodology. And the outcome of that was that one of the 6 solutions that we took through ended up adapting a piece of seed planting technology that moved from being able to plant 60,000 trees in a day to 1.2 million trees in a day.
No.
And so you were sort of like, wow.
Yeah.
And this also then came to fruition just when COVID was taking off. So there are all sorts of limitations around confined spaces of how you actually plant trees. So this was a huge step and proved the methodology in a kind of non-digital way, but it's still innovation. So it's innovation in the broader sense. It's about the application of a methodology.
I love that. And it's a long time since I've done a public sector tender, because we're very small and we don't have an environmental policy or an anti-slavery policy. I am against it, obviously, the slavery bit, not the environmental bit. Is it easier now for services to tender in the public sector?
It's much easier,
okay.
And in part, so there was a recognition that the SME base is the lion's share of our economy.
Mm-hmm.
And how can the public sector, which has such a chunky procurement budget, support that sector? And it's not just the direct suppliers, it's kind of the supply chain as well.
Yeah.
And for that, you've got to look at, well, how do you make things easier for people to work? So do you really need 3 years worth of accounts? Or actually, could you just be a new company that's bringing a team together to solve a particular problem? Could you, what is the size of the application we really need to put together to define whether, whether a company is worth or right for working with the public sector? And so we've simplified over the years a number of the routes to come into government. So it's much easier for companies to get involved.
Good. I'm pleased to hear it. And is this just in Scotland, or is this across England, Wales and Northern Ireland?
Across the UK, absolutely.
Great.
So you have UK-wide government procurement services. You also have Scotland and devolved nations-specific procurement services. So all procurements in the public sector for Scotland are put through something called Public Contracts Scotland.
Okay.
But then you can look wider at things like G-Cloud for the UK government, or DOS, which is Digital Outcomes and Services.
Cool.
So there are lots of avenues now for smaller businesses to engage with kind of public sector.
Oh, hooray!
And then actually, I have to say, I tell you what the Scottish one really good at is if you're kind of in the system and go through the right way, the payments are very quick. So there is a pay within 10 days for the most part. So it's very rapid payment system. And where that's not happened, then there's something's just got lost in the system. So
that's good.
It's really good, really, really good.
Yeah, refreshing.
Cash is king.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah, it really is. Okay, so what, as somebody who came from a real entrepreneurial background, you grew your own business in London, you were successful at that. And what were the major hurdles you had to overcome in the public sector to really get this going?
So people don't know what they don't know. And again, rewinding 9 years, that when tenders were being put out, the whole notion of market engagement was slightly seen as a potential conflict of interest. The fact you'd already spoken to a company before a tender was going out might in some way influence the decision. And actually what we recognized was that by engaging with the market, you're going to understand what technologies are out there in the first place. So that helps you look at your policy development and think, well, actually, if we understand what the technological horizons are, then are we making policy that's right for that? But also, you get an understanding of what sort of fit or type of company you think might be right for the product or the service you need delivering. So an example is that when I was working on the GLOW program, so for viewers and listeners, GLOW is Scottish Schools intranet. And that's been going around for about it's been 16 years. And when I joined the government, one of the reasons I was brought in was to look at the retendering process. So lots of technical components, and how do we take it from one big contract, chunk it up into little ones. And looking at how the blogs service was being delivered, which was on a WordPress platform, the engagement afternoon that we had to put forward around getting potential suppliers to look at this, we had the usual big suppliers into the room, but none of them really had WordPress capabilities. And actually what I need to do is look at WordPress, who were the people who had the authority to take the core WordPress code and amend it. So it's about then understanding who in the market is best placed to service the need, even though they might not be on the government list.
Yeah.
And so we found 8 companies in the world that had the authority to change the core WordPress code. 2 of them were in the UK, and we had chats with them. And one of them, we ran a quick quote tender, very quick procurement, and one of them got it. Now, if we had stuck to our usual, here's our list, we wouldn't have got that. No, and so again, that market engagement piece is really important.
Fascinating. So culturally, how was it for you moving from an entrepreneurial organization into a government body?
So the whole culture piece, I think, is fascinating. Things aren't right or they're wrong. They just are.
Yeah, it's true.
And so, when you're thinking about the outcomes you're trying to achieve rather than outputs, which many people like to focus on, and realizing that a meeting isn't an outcome, that that sense of urgency was one that was very different. So I remember the first meeting I had, and someone said, by the way, you're on a week's notice contract. And I said, really, that's the most amount of certainty I've had in 8 years.
Yeah.
And, a completely different way of thinking about things. And so, there is an urgency. You've got to win the business, make the payroll when you're in a company. But your salaries you don't have to worry about that. And it's not just public sector, but in a large organization.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And
I think a lot of these things are not public versus private. They're actually large versus small.
I would totally agree with that. Yeah, I would.
And I saw that because right at the start of my career, I was on the grad program at Scottish Power in Glasgow. So got experience of what a corporate looked like. And again, moving from corporate to startup, to then back to large organization, again, very different cultures and ways of working. But it comes back to this, we had a vision around what we thought the CivTech program should look like. And I had a very accommodating boss, and who was really good at just giving us the long leash to go and experiment and push this forward, which was great. So it couldn't be done without Colin Cook. But we had this vision of what needed to be achieved. And when you have a compelling mission, vision, value set, then you believe in it, people buy into it, and it just takes time to get people to come around to it. And it can be frustrating. Doesn't mean to say that people are trying to be blocking in any way. It's just they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And of course, you get greeted with statements like, "Oh, but we've always done it this way," or "Yeah, but the rules say we shouldn't do it." And then you unpick that and say, "Can I just clarify? Is that the rules, or is it the law?" And we come into this place of, what's procurement law, LAW, or procurement law, LORE. And one of the greatest learnings was you have laws, rules, and guidance. And actually, when you unpicked it, the laws were quite flexible, the rules were completely inflexible, and the guidance you bear no resemblance to the law. So, so it's this journey you go on, and you want to take people on that journey. And I think that building up that external validation, so one of the key things around working often in any public sector organization is that they like external validation. So does an industry body validate what you're wanting to do? Okay. Is there somewhere else you've seen this that you can pull this together? And so that's now in terms of, I could talk a bit about the kind of the stuff I'm working on now in terms of the CivTech Alliance, which is this global network. But you're then transforming the way government does stuff is hard.
Yeah. And
you want to lean in on folks who are doing the same sort of thing. And that's why as a community of practice for this is so important.
Well, go on then. Tell us about what you are doing now and where this is going to lead.
Well, right from the start of CivTech, when we saw the opportunity at a national level of what the impact could be, already we were thinking about, well, what might that look internationally? And as we started speaking with the others, government teams around the world, and saw them setting up their programs, there was always the opportunity to as you saw them set up, you think, what would happen? What could happen if you then joined those nodes up around the world? So how could we take a piece of technology that's in Brazil, might make that work in Lithuania? how could we adopt some policy in South Australia, such as the Office of the Chief Entrepreneur, and establish that in Scotland, as we have with Mark Logan. So once you start having these nodes being built all over the place because governments are responding to disruption and they need their own in-house teams, so you have these in-house teams being set up, you then join them up. Okay. And that's what we did for COP26. So we took this network, which we had started in March 2020, just at the beginning of lockdowns, this community of practice. We meet still, and to this morning, I chaired another weekly call of folks around the world. And, we discuss what's happening, anything we've learned, any updates. So you've got this community of practice. So a classic example this morning, you've got an Egyptian team looking to do a pilot on autism and AI, and how do we get the indicators in early around childhood autism. It turns out that South Australia has a minister for autism. Connection being made. You then have Estonia and the Accelerate Estonia team on the call, looking at what they're doing for drone technology. Oh, turns out that another country is exploring the same thing. So you have these links, and what you're doing is you're bringing folks together around what possibility of technologies. And so for COP, what we did was we set up around a global scale-up program. So how could we leverage the network, the know-how, the expertise of all these groups around the world and bring them together for the benefit of people and the planet? So then there's the opportunity of saying, right, how can we source, surface, and scale climate tech solutions for global public sector applications? Get them in front of government teams around the world in an accelerated access program over 7 weeks, a safari, we called it.
Okay.
Introduced to different government teams, and then from there, present at COP26. And the result of that was that companies went on to win millions in terms of contracts, not just within the teams, but because of the exposure, and millions in terms of funding. And we ran that the same for COP27, and we're then looking to do the same for COP28 in UAE. So it's a way of getting government teams to work together, because we need to be looking up and out, not down and in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You must have, with these initiatives, saved so many millions in time, money, wasted efforts going down, dead ends, procuring things that weren't right. I mean, you've just created some brilliant shortcuts to get to where governments, countries need to be, which is fantastic. Do you feel proud of your achievements?
Absolutely. But I should say it's a team effort.
Yes.
Absolutely team effort. And we had a great team when we set up. And I had, great directors who were able to give us that space, who recognize that actually, if you're going to do things differently, then you need to create different conditions.
Yeah.
And the sort of stuff that you and I have talked about before, in terms of the mission, vision, values, and that whole supporting systems to ensure that you can live those values and achieve those outcomes that hit the vision and are driven by the mission. So, having that team, and then no one can do it by themselves at all.
No.
And then, of course, you're reliant on really game public sector partners who are wanting to take risks and do things differently. But what really came out of this was then this whole sense of public entrepreneurship, how you can actually, have that mindset of an entrepreneur and deliver that within the public sector, so the persistence to move forward, the resilience to take the flak, the urgency to get results, and deploy that. And, that sense of value creation rather than value extraction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a very different sort of relationship than that transactional supplier client traditional way of working. And actually, if you look at partnerships and value creation, you are going to deliver far more societal value. You're going to deliver more jobs. You're going to deliver more coffers for the taxpayer. And so, there's a win-win-win all around this for just doing things differently.
Now, have the NHS adopted this methodology?
Yeah, they've done lots of stuff around it. So we had a number in the early days, number of things around data. But interestingly, it's not just whether
it's all right. People can probably hear my dogs, children, dogs, cats.
Okay. That's okay. The troops have just returned.
All right. We have everything on the podcast. Teenagers pop in at times.
Great. Well, it's a bit like our meetings, which are our weekly Alliance core meetings. These are family-friendly engagements. And I have friends around the world, and we've all seen each other's children sort of grow up, and sometimes they're there in the call. Now they're here, and then they'll shortly be there. Where were we, Rebecca, on that
the
train of
NHS?
thought?
So
the NHS, yeah, exactly. So you get examples where you can look. So a challenge sponsor might present their problem, and they take the company solution so far, but that initial prototyping is enough for that company then to go to another organization and say, hey, we're working with the NHS, Scottish Government, and we can and so another blue chip company might look at that as a reference, saying, right, we'll take you on because you've been kind of checked by the government. And equally, you might have a solution coming in as a solution working in for one of the directorates around health and well-being, and we trialed the system. Wasn't quite right for us, but it went into the NHS,
right,
and has skyrocketed in terms of kind of the opportunity for that company. So there's ways that actually the public sector can really help entrepreneurs with their businesses, but you need these sort of structured programs. I used to call it, refer to us being the scaffolding that we put around to ensure that innovation could really, really take off.
Yeah, because it doesn't happen by accident. People think it's an accidental thing, but actually, like everything, it's a process.
It is a process, and that's not to say that you, by having a process, you carve out the creativity.
No.
It's just you need a bit of facilitation to make the magic happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being open-minded with the fact that of unintended consequences and benefits that might come out of it. And that was exactly what we had with the Public Entrepreneur Program, where we found that the companies were being put through an accelerator program with workshops on product, personal, and business development. And those workshops on mission, vision, values, or going to market, or presentations, or communication, were as valid for the public sector teams as they were for the entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So we then spotted this and said, right, okay, well, maybe we should put a course around this. So we did something a bit more structured for CivTech 2, and then by CivTech 3 we had a course, and then CivTech 4 there was a proper program rolled out, and then the pandemic happened, and so it got shelved for the time being. But you don't know where some of these things will take you. But
nice.
So it's and that's the thing. It's being open-minded about these things.
It really is. Okay, I've got an odd question for you that is easier for business owners to answer. I don't know how easy this is going to be for you to answer, Alex, but if this, let's take CivTech, okay, rather than the whole of the Scottish government. CivTech is this sort of piece of work you've done. It has an identity to it. If you were to describe its character or its personality, how would you describe it?
Well, if you take the mission statement,
Mm.
that would describe a lot of how it was. So when we set it up, and it's evolved slightly over the years, and certainly up until 2019 when I was involved. But the mission was to drive daring and innovation in the public sector.
Okay.
By collaboratively solving challenges that make people's lives better.
Okay.
And in doing so, creating generations of sustainable businesses, growth businesses. So, how do you describe it as the character?
Yeah.
Well, it was out there. It was doing stuff. It was, frankly, punching through walls. It was making the impossible, perceived impossible, possible. And that real sense of mission drove us, sometimes at the wall, but drove us to deliver stuff that we hadn't thought was possible. And yet we were convinced, because we were convinced it was 1,000% it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Conviction is so important.
Yeah.
And if you come up against a team that's highly, has high conviction over something, versus the inertia of an organization which is doing its job but isn't perhaps as of conviction of what they're doing, who's going to, where the dial's going to tilt.
Yeah, you do.
And I don't talk about this about winning and losing, because it's not that at all. But it's just about nudging organizations to think and then behave differently. And if that achieves better outcomes for citizens, that's what we should be doing. So, that's our North Star is, does this achieve better outcomes for citizens?
Right. Where are you going next?
So it's interesting to see how the Alliance is shaping up. It's been very informal. And we've deliberately kept that sort of informal culture. And it's a group of friends around the world who volunteer their time to share best practice, to support the companies within the ecosystems. I think the time now has come to formalize that and give that a bit more of a structure, which makes it more of a thing, an entity to then grow and get funding. But so that's one aspect. But I think that, with my new role within the Economy Directorate on entrepreneurship, I'm able to actually put into practice a lot of the stuff I have been putting into practice. So
Great.
I shall qualify that, put into policy practice the stuff that I have worked on, been doing essentially since 2005.
Yeah.
And so that's the opportunity. And I think that, if the vision is about making Scotland an entrepreneurial country, what does that mean? How do we actually make that happen? And I think there's enough ingredients here to make that happen. We now just need to get on and do it. And, there's all sorts of strategies out there, but strategy is worthless without the ability to deliver.
Yeah,
and that's where we focus on.
Yeah. Will you, and you may not be able to answer this question, will you have any input into education? Because I personally believe that entrepreneurship starts at nursery.
So there are touch points into education, and I think that that's a really valid point. And I've had various conversations with senior folk in the education sphere around this, and I'm pleased with the sort of noises one's getting around. Yeah, we recognize this. There's something here. So
I was talking to my teenage daughter. She was doing business studies in S2, and the curriculum was about analyzing data, and they got her to analyze data about geese and their flight path. I went, what's that got to do with business? Surely the best data they could give you to analyze would be about customer service achievements, profit and loss, footfall, looking at a graph of sales and costs. And I just thought there's something missing here.
Well, I know, and you know, as an impartial civil servant, I can't comment
Can't possibly comment.
on
No.
some things, but
No.
I think there are certainly some areas where we should be focusing more.
Yeah.
And you know, define education in the first instance. It's so broad, and I think, you know, well, you mentioned there the whole sales thing. I'm interested in that area because I think that Scotland as a nation is a country that produces some amazing stuff.
Yeah.
But are we really a sales nation? And there's a whole cultural piece in there about us being out there. And actually, you know, Scots are often seen as we're sort of hiding up, you know, light under our bushel. You know, it's we're not really wanting to be up and out there. So if there was a magic wand that I could wave, I think certainly it'd be looking at what is our skill set in that area.